I ceased to exist the moment they marked me. The Emperor's angels swept into our hive like a storm of gold and ceramite, their warplate blazing beneath the pitiless factory lights. They spoke no words of honor, offered no promises of glory, only the cold inevitability of duty. No question was asked, no consent sought. Within the Imperium, service is not an option, but the sole reason a life may claim worth. Thus, I was seized with 30 other boys, plucked from the savage gang wars of Hive Secundus. My final memory of home is etched in rust and smoke. Titanic spires of corroded metal clawing upward toward a sky none of us had ever truly seen. Acrid fumes that had burned our lungs since birth, the endless mechanical thrum that had been our lullaby. None of it was beautiful, yet every scrap of it was mine. All of it vanished forever. The transport ship shuddered and hummed as we sat rigid in wordless dread. Not one voice dared break the suffocating silence. The Space Marine sentinel before us made even the boldest hive gangers shrink into obedience. His armor, a deep crimson like fresh spilled blood, bore sigils of holy war and unbending devotion. His helm, a skull of cold metal, betrayed no hint of feeling, no trace of mortal weakness. We had heard of these angels of death in hushed tales and flickering propaganda reels. Yet nothing in rumor or legend could have prepared us for the raw, overwhelming presence they carried. Every motion he made carried a measured inevitability, as if reality itself bent to his command. At last, the Space Marine spoke, his words rasping through the helm's Vox grill in a voice both thunderous and mechanical. "You are not chosen for greatness. You are raw material, nothing more. Many of you will die. Most will fail. This is no road to glory. Only a sentence of service until death takes you." It was nothing like the call to heroism I had once imagined. No promise of power, no hint of honor, only the certainty of duty and the shadow of the grave. I studied the boys around me. Some barely past childhood, thin-limbed and hollow-cheeked, their eyes carrying a weight far older than their years. Others mirrored my own kind, scarred veterans of hive gang wars, bodies toughened and minds hardened to cruelty. Fear bound us together, though none dared speak of it. The voyage stretched across 7 days, though time dissolved into meaninglessness inside the ship's steel gut. We were issued food once daily, a tasteless nutrient gruel that nonetheless filled our stomachs more than any underhive meal ever had. Twice a day we were permitted to relieve ourselves beneath the cold gaze of tireless servitors. We slept directly on the metal deck, clinging to one another for warmth against the ship's unyielding chill. Through it all, the Space Marine remained unchanging. Never eating, never sleeping, an eternal sentinel of war forged into living armor. When the 7th day broke, a deep tremor coursed through the vessel. Our destination had been reached. The ramp groaned open, and a searing brilliance poured inside, scalding our eyes after endless days of shadow. Driven like livestock, we stumbled into the glare, dazed and blinking. The realm awaiting us felt almost unreal. Vast mountains thrust toward the heavens, their summits veiled in drifting cloud. Across the valleys spread forests of towering trees, living giants we had known only from grainy picked captures. The air struck hardest of all, sharp and pure enough to sting, our lungs aflame after years of breathing the hive's poisoned haze. Presiding over this wild majesty loomed a fortress monastery hewn into the face of the greatest peak, a colossal proof of mankind's will to tame nature itself. "Welcome to your grave," the Space Marine intoned, at last lifting away his helm. The visage revealed could scarcely be called human. Flesh, corpse pale and latticed with old scars, eyes that pierced as if to read the soul. a mouth carved into an eternal frown. Yet deep within those cold eyes flickered something I could not name. Perhaps the faint memory of standing here once as a terrified youth, wondering if home would ever be seen again. "I am Brother Sergeant Krause," he declared. "From this moment, all former lives are erased. Your names mean nothing. Your families are ghosts. You exist solely to serve this chapter, and through it, the God Emperor of mankind." From the fortress gates, another figure advanced, robed in white rather than warplate, a silent counterpoint to the armored sentinel beside him. His scalp gleamed bare beneath the cold light, a face mapped in surgical scars and studded with augmetic implants. One eye was gone entirely, replaced by a crimson lens that whirred faintly as it tightened its mechanical focus upon us. "I am Apothecary Vaughn," the robed Space Marine proclaimed. "You will now undergo preliminary examination. Those who pass will begin the transformation. Those who fail will serve the Emperor in other ways." The verdict required no elaboration. Pass or perish, succeed or be repurposed. The Imperium squandered nothing, least of all, human lives. Any soul judged unworthy would likely be stripped of thought and reforged as a servitor, mind erased and body rebuilt with crude machinery to toil as living apparatus. We were marched through colossal adamantium gates into the fortress monastery's hidden heart. The passageways yawned wide enough for 3 Space Marines to stride abreast in full tactical dreadnought plate, their vaulted ceilings soaring like cathedrals. Every wall blazed with sacred imagery, skulls, chapter sigils, and devotional carvings that caught the dim light like silent omens. Servitors shuffled past in halting rhythms, their remaining human eyes barely flicking toward us. Chapter serfs scurried through their appointed tasks with heads bowed, reverence etched into every movement. At last, we entered the examination chamber, a place of sterile chill. White tiles covered floor and wall alike, blotched with dark stains no cleansing could erase. Surgical instruments lined the room, some familiar, others alien and sinister in their very design, each whispering of pain and transformation. Examination tables lined the chamber in precise ranks, each fitted with cold restraints awaiting their prey. "Strip," Apothecary Vaughn ordered, voice sharp and unquestionable. "Completely." A breath of hesitation passed before obedience took hold. In the underhive, nakedness meant danger, but none dared defy him. We peeled away our grime-caked garments, the final tatters of old identities, and stood trembling in the sterile chill. The inspection that followed was relentless and dehumanizing. Every opening was prodded, every limb measured, every reflex struck and recorded. Blood was drawn, skin scraped, nerves tested without pause. Vaughn and his aides discussed us like butcher stock, coolly noting defects and possibilities. Subject 17. Superior bone density, promising. Subject 23. Lungs scarred from hive pollution, schedule for enhanced respiratory graft. Subject 8. Malnourished, skeletal growth compromised, reject. So the litany continued. Numbers instead of names, materials instead of men. 3 boys were removed mid-process, deemed unworthy of the coming transformation. Their faces held a strange mix of shame and quiet relief, believing they had escaped with their lives. I never saw them again. When the ordeal ended, we were issued identical gray robes and escorted to a dormitory of perfect austerity. Rows of narrow cots, each with a single thin blanket and nothing more. No markings on the walls, no trace of individuality permitted. A servitor loomed at the doorway, half man, half machine, its flesh clumsily riveted to crude augmetics. "Sleep," it droned, voice a grating echo of humanity. Tomorrow you begin to die. I lay on the allotted cot, unsettled by the strange softness of the thin mattress after a lifetime spent on bare metal and cracked concrete. All around, the other boys shifted in uneasy silence, some muffling quiet sobs, others staring blankly upward, lost in thoughts too heavy to name. No words passed between us. What could be said? We had been selected. But for what fate? To be reforged as inhuman warriors for a god emperor none of us had ever glimpsed, or merely to perish in the attempt. My mind drifted back to the Underhive, to the gang we called the Blood Scorpions, a pitiful claim to menace. We had bled and killed for squalid scraps of territory no sane soul desired, for resources so thin they barely kept us alive. Yet within that misery, a rough brotherhood had taken shape, born of shared hunger and danger. Here there was no brotherhood, only rivalry. We were no longer comrades. We were raw candidates in a brutal culling where only the strongest might emerge as space marines. The rest would be discarded or subjected to fates worse than death. As drowsiness finally crept upon me, a strange calm settled over my thoughts. I had endured 18 years in the Underhive, where most never reached 10. I had slain my first rival at 12, seizing survival by calculated violence, and clawed my way to lieutenant among the Blood Scorpions. If anyone could outlast this transformation, surely it was me. I was wrong. Tororal would not endure. He could not. A space marine is no exalted human, but something altogether different, at once greater and diminished beyond mortal measure. Dawn came like a hammer, heralded by a blaring klaxon that tore us from uneasy sleep. We were granted 5 minutes to relieve ourselves in communal stalls, stripped of any pretense of privacy before being driven toward a colossal dining hall. Above, full-fledged space marines occupied elevated tables, consuming immense portions of food with cold, machine-like precision. We aspirants were funneled to the lower benches where bowls of nutrient porridge waited. Gray and tasteless, yet heavy with sustenance. Eat quickly, a chapter serf instructed flatly. 10 minutes. As I forced down the bland meal, I studied the chamber itself. The walls bristled with grim trophies of war. Alien remains preserved within shimmering stasis fields, shattered Xenos weapons displayed like relics of devotion. Dominating the entire ceiling stretched a monumental Aquila, the Imperium's twin-headed eagle, its golden wings unfurled in silent supremacy. Before our allotted time expired, Brother Sergeant Krauss strode into the hall. Conversation among the aspirants ceased at once, silence falling like a drawn blade. "Today," he declared, his voice ringing with iron finality, "the remaking begins. Your bodies are frail, your minds unproven. Some of you will perish during the conditioning required before implantation. This is no accident. Only those found truly worthy will receive the Emperor's gifts." We were marched to an immense training yard, an open expanse encircled by the fortress's looming battlements. Morning air knifed through us, each breath blooming as pale vapor. In every direction, mountains reared skyward, their crowns of snow defying the summer season. "Run," Krauss ordered, his voice as sharp as stone, gesturing toward a narrow trail that spiraled up the mountainside. "Fail to complete the circuit by midday, and you will not eat. Fall behind tomorrow, and you will not eat again. On the third failure, you will be removed from the program." The trail stretched into the distance, vanishing into the dark tree line halfway up the nearest peak. None of us knew how far it wound, only that it measured in punishing kilometers. For those born and raised within the cramped arteries of a hive, such a run bordered on the unimaginable. Most had never run more than frantic sprints through rusted corridors. Yet we ran. At first, the pace seemed bearable. But the relentless climb and thinning air soon ground us down. Before the first kilometer ended, the formation had broken apart. The strongest forging ahead, while the weakest faltered and drifted to the rear. I kept to the middle, the hardened muscles earned in underhive gang wars serving me well, though every breath of sharp mountain purity scalded my lungs. The path pitched ever steeper, twisting through dense forest where treacherous roots lunged to catch our feet, then burst onto naked rock ledges where one careless step could plunge a body hundreds of meters into the void below. All the while, servitor skulls floated alongside us, silent sentinels relaying every heartbeat and falter to unseen overseers. Time dissolved as we ran. The sun climbed without pity, its heat striking like a hammer. My gray robe clung, drenched in sweat, and my feet burned and bled inside ill-fitted boots. Still I pressed on, narrowing my world to the next breath, the next step. This was not so different from the underhive, I told myself. Life there had been one endless test of endurance and will. This was simply another shape of the same struggle. When at last I staggered back into the training yard, the sun hung directly overhead. I had crossed the line before midday. Barely. Of the 27 aspirants who had begun the ascent, only 18 returned in time. The rest limped in hours later, faces drawn with exhaustion and the bitter certainty that no food awaited them. That night we collapsed onto our cots, muscles shrieking with pain. One boy never came back at all. No one mentioned his name, no one asked where he had gone. Failure required no explanation. It simply erased you. Dawn brought the same ordeal. But now weighted packs dragged at our shoulders. The day after, primitive carapace armor joined the burden. Each sunrise sharpened the cruelty. Each day more boys vanished. By week's end, only 15 of us remained. Yet those who endured grew harder. Our bodies knitting strength at startling speed, molded by unrelenting repetition into something beyond the frail humanity we had carried here. Our bodies were being hardened to endure the greater metamorphosis yet to come. In the second week, the focus shifted to combat, not with the roaring chainswords or holy bolt pistols of a full space marine, but with wooden staves and our own bare fists. Brothers Sergeant Krause and the other drill masters hammered into us the foundations of Imperial close-quarters doctrine, a savage, unrelenting style, built on overwhelming power and swift, decisive blows. Hour after hour, we clashed in sparring bouts and punishing drills. Friendship was forbidden. Mercy was beaten out of us along with weakness. I found a grim satisfaction in my performance. The brutal schooling of the underhive, granting me an instinct for the viciousness demanded. Yet even I was humbled daily. The training officers, their transhuman forms moving with inhuman speed and flawless precision, corrected us with blinding demonstrations that left bruises and shattered pride. Each night my flesh sang with new pain, new welts and cuts. But the deeper transformation was in the mind. By the third week, hypno-indoctrination began. We were marched into lightless chambers and bound into cold metal thrones. Spiked neural jacks bored into our skulls with stabbing pressure, locking us to the machines. Then the visions came, searing floods of memory and revelation that bypassed eyes and ears to strike directly at thought. The endless wars of the Imperium, the majesty of the God Emperor, the treachery of alien, mutant, and heretic, the manuals of battle doctrine and weapons lore, litanies of hatred and unshakable devotion. The torrent threatened to dissolve identity itself. Hours passed in what felt like moments, and we emerged from each session hollowed and reformed, minds sharpened and strangely alien. Knowledge without faith is worthless. preached Brother Chaplain Mordeth during one dark sermon. And understanding without faith is perilous. You will know, you will believe, you will become. You will believe, or you will die. Brother Chaplain Mordeth was terror made flesh. His armor shone black as a starless void, and the skull-faced helm he wore seemed less a mask than the very visage of death. In his grasp rested a crackling Crozius Arcanum, its twin-headed Aquila wreathed in energy potent enough to shatter bone or rupture organs with a single blow. He preached not of the Emperor's love, but of his judgment, not of triumph, but of duty, not of glory, but of sacrifice. You think you know suffering? He thundered once, pacing before us as we knelt in the chapter chapel. You know nothing. The Emperor endures upon the golden throne, his body a desiccated husk sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 souls each day. For 10,000 years he has borne this torment, unyielding, sleepless, eternal. What are your fleeting pains beside his endless agony? Less than nothing. By the close of our first month, only 10 aspirants remained. We had been reshaped into beings no longer fully human, yet not yet transhuman. Bodies hardened, minds steeped in imperial dogma, spirits broken and reforged in the furnace of unending trial. We were deemed ready for the next ordeal. The true metamorphosis awaited. The surgeries unfolded within the Apothecarion, a vast sanctum of steel and sanctity buried deep in the fortress monastery. Apothecary Vaughn and his silent adepts worked with a precision honed across centuries. We were not cut open all at once, but according to a grim, deliberate sequence. I was the third to be summoned beneath their knives. I watched as the first 2 aspirants were led into the surgical theater. Hours crawled past before the first was wheeled out, unconscious, irrevocably altered. His chest lay split and resealed, the flesh puckered with raw scars while monitoring devices clicked and pulsed, charting the rhythms of a foreign organ now beating within. The second aspirant never emerged alive. A chapter serf eventually appeared, dragging a body bag whose weight told its own final story. No explanation was offered, no lament permitted. Failure needed no commentary. When my turn arrived, I was stripped and scrubbed with antiseptics that burned like acid. Fully conscious, I was bound to the cold operating slab, veins lanced with needles that flooded me with paralytic drugs, locking my body in stillness, but leaving my mind cruelly alert. Apothecary Vaughn approached, scalpel in hand, his augmetic eye whirring to a precise focus on my chest. The secondary heart, he said with clinical calm, the first of many gifts, should your body accept it. Then came pain beyond imagining. Though my muscles could not move, I felt every incision, every forced rearrangement of organs to carve space for what nature had never meant to dwell there. The secondary heart, harvested from the chapter's jealously guarded gene seed, was a dense living mass of lab-forged tissue destined to grow into a complete second heart, doubling blood flow and sustaining the superhuman strength my body was being shaped to wield. Throughout the ordeal, Brother Chaplain Mordeth stood sentinel, intoning endless litanies of fortitude and endurance. Whether the words were meant for me or served as sacred protocol, I could not tell through the blistering fog of agony. I longed to scream, but the drugs denied me even that release. I prayed to faint and was refused. At last, it ended. They wheeled me into a recovery chamber where the lone surviving aspirant lay motionless, another initiate remade or condemned in silence. His eyes met mine, reflecting the same shock, the same profound violation. We had been told our bodies would be remade, But true understanding arrived only now, revealed in shared torment. Before we could be forged anew, we first had to be unmade, dismantled so something different could be built from the wreckage. Recovery stretched into weeks as the secondary heart slowly merged with my circulatory system. The pain never truly faded. It merely shifted, migrating through muscle and vein as my body fought the alien graft before grudgingly accepting it. Blood was drawn at regular intervals, analyzed with cold precision. Drug dosages adjusted to keep me balanced between waking agony and merciful blackness. When the secondary heart was finally judged stable, the next ordeal commenced. The osmodula, a tiny implant at the base of my skull, began to transform my very skeleton. Bones thickened and hardened, laced with ceramic-like deposits. Each pulse of growth and agony multiplied 1,000-fold. I could feel my own frame stretching the skin, tugging at muscles and sinews as it reforged itself. Organ followed organ in merciless sequence. The Biscopea nestled deep within my chest to accelerate raw muscle development. The hematopoietic implant, hemostamen, was set within my primary heart, re-engineering my blood to carry more oxygen and heal wounds with impossible speed. Beside it, the Laramens organ began releasing specialized cells that sealed injuries almost instantly, turning bleeding into memory before it could claim life. Each new implantation demanded weeks of adaptation, the training regimen shifting constantly to test and reinforce our emerging abilities. We stretched taller, shoulders widening, muscle and bone hardening beyond mortal measure. Senses sharpened, reflexes quickened. With every alteration, we stepped further from ordinary humanity and closer to the transhuman ideal of the Adeptus Astartes. Yet the process was far from flawless. 2 of our dwindling brethren perished when their bodies rejected the catalepsia node, an implant fixed to the rear of the brain that permits a space marine to rest one hemisphere at a time and thus banish the need for sleep. Another aspirant was maimed when the implantation of the omophagea, a pre-stomach designed to neutralize poisons, went catastrophically wrong. He was removed in silence, destined perhaps for a meager role as chapter serf if luck held, or more likely for a servitor's mechanized half-life if it did not. Through it all, the training never relented. Whenever our transforming bodies allowed, the physical trials grew harsher, shaped to exploit our swelling strength. Combat instruction advanced as well, now incorporating live Adeptus Astartes weapons and gear calibrated to our enlarging frames. Meanwhile, the hypno-indoctrination deepened, drilling down into chapter-specific battle doctrines and the minute intricacies of weapon maintenance and battlefield logistics. We were not merely trained, we were programmed, our minds sculpted to operate as space marines rather than as men. Independent thought was not extinguished, but forced into narrow channels of tactical calculation and relentless combat efficiency, leaving no room for personal dreams or private ambition. By the 6th relentless month, only 5 of the original 30 aspirants still endured. Each of us had undergone nearly all the fundamental organ grafts, while the most formidable augmentations awaited proof of our worth as scout marines. By any mortal measure, we were already remade, towering over ordinary men, our reshaped bodies capable of deeds that once would have seemed impossible. Yet we remained neophytes, names uncarved in the chapter's roll of brothers, potential untested. The ultimate ordeal now loomed, a crucible that would decide whether we deserved to don the sacred scout armor and claim a first step toward full brotherhood. The proving ground lay on a death world 50 light years from the chapter's home, a wasteland chosen for its mercilessness. A small strike cruiser bore us there, each aspirant locked inside a solitary drop pod, alone with his resolve. the ship's armory, Brother Sergeant Krauss addressed us as the black carapace beneath our flesh, meshed for the first time with the hard shell of Scout warplate. "You will descend one by one," he said, testing the seal at my neck with calm exactitude. "Each of you has a designated extraction point 50 kilometers from your assigned drop site. 3 days are all you have to reach it. The world below crawls with hostile life. None of it will spare you. Geological surveys hint at mineral wealth the chapter may one day claim. But your only mission is survival. You will carry a combat blade, a bolt pistol with 3 magazines, and a data slate with only the most meager navigational guidance. Endure, adapt, and prove you are worthy of the brotherhood that waits." He paused, his transhuman gaze locking with mine like a vice. "This is not simply a test of survival," he said, each word striking like a hammer blow. "It is a mission to assess resources. The chapter demands a full account of the world's potential. Fail to deliver that data, and your effort will be judged a failure, even should you reach the extraction point alive." As the words sank in, another Space Marine approached, the sigil of the Tech Marine Order gleaming crimson on his armor, cradling our weapons with ritual precision. "The Emperor's eyes are upon you," he intoned, presenting me with a bolt pistol whose cold, immense weight registered even through my genetically hardened muscles. "Remember, a Space Marine serves even in death." From there, we were guided one by one to our assigned drop pods, each a steel womb and tomb combined, engineered to smash through atmosphere and land its cargo, be it warrior or war gear, onto a planet's surface with merciless efficiency. Inside, the chamber was stripped to essentials: a restraint harness, scant life support, and silence. When the doors sealed with a final pneumatic hiss, severing every link to my brothers, an absolute solitude pressed in. Even the lawless underhive had always throbbed with the nearness of countless lives, and the fortress monastery had pulsed with the ever-present chapter. Now, within this coffin of iron hurtling toward a hostile sphere, I stood utterly alone. Then came the drop, pure violence given form. Despite inertial dampeners and the resilience of my altered frame, the pod's brutal launch and screaming descent crushed me against the harness, the G-forces fierce enough to bruise even a skeleton reinforced by gene-forged bone. The pod's interior grew furnace hot as atmospheric friction wrapped the hull in a blazing sheath of superheated plasma. Impact followed like a hammer from the void, a bone-shattering collision as the retro thrusters failed to fully arrest the descent. Emergency protocols answered in an instant, flooding the cramped compartment with shock-absorbing gel to stave off lethal trauma. For long heartbeats, I hung weightless in the viscous medium. Enhanced lungs calmly drawing oxygen from the enriched fluid, while the world outside screamed past. Then, a sharp detonation of explosive bolts shattered the stillness, the pod's forward plate bursting outward in a meticulously timed sequence. The gel sluiced away, and I stepped onto alien ground for the first time in my existence. The land that received me was primal and brutal. Colossal trees loomed like living fortresses, their vast crowns blotting out the blue-white glare of the system's distant sun. The air was a heavy brew of dampness and rot, lush with the raw perfume of decay, nothing like the filtered reek of the hive or even the thin chill of the fortress monastery's mountain winds. All around pulsed the unending clamor of life, foreign and unrestrained, a wild symphony of feeding and breeding. Moving with drilled precision, I checked my gear. Bolt pistol locked secure in its holster. Combat knife resting ready at my thigh, data slate active and pulsing with the coordinates of my extraction point. The The data slate showed I had landed roughly 48 kilometers from the extraction site, which meant keeping a relentless pace of at least 16 kilometers each day to make the deadline. For an unaugmented human, this would have been a grueling march even across gentle plains. For a space marine neophyte on a death world, was a crucible designed to test every graft, every discipline, every lesson the gene work had etched into flesh and nerve. The chapter expected nothing short of perfection. Anything less was failure. And failure meant death. I set out at once. Falling into the long, tireless lope, our re-engineered muscles and enhanced hearts could sustain for hours despite the drag of armor and war gear. Such endurance was one of the many brutal gifts of the Astartes transformation. 3 hours into the trek, the first attack came. A predator burst from the tangle, a creature like a reptilian wolf, bristling with surplus limbs and glittering eyes. It was swift, but my reflexes, sharpened beyond mortal limits, were swifter. The combat blade slid into its throat before its overlapping jaws could close on my armored leg. A spray of black ichor hissed and smoked where it splashed against the ceramic plates of my scout harness. Mission protocol demanded specimens, so I collected blood and tissue, feeding them to the data slate's crude cogitator, which quickly identified several promising biochemical compounds. All findings would be transmitted to the chapter upon recovery, enriching their understanding of the planet's hidden resources. The day ground on in this same relentless pattern: movement, vigilance, and the constant readiness for violence. Movement, observation, and brief clashes with the planet's savage wildlife marked the rest of the day. By nightfall, I had crossed nearly 20 kilometers and saturated the data slate with a wealth of biological and geological records. Choosing a hollow beneath the vast roots of a titanic tree, I settled into a guarded half-sleep, one hemisphere of my brain resting while the other remained alert through the tireless vigilance of the catalepsian node. With dawn came new trials. The forest thinned and bled into an endless swamp, foul and bubbling with venomous gases. My armor's autosenses warned of airborne toxins, but my multi-lung and enhanced metabolism filtered the corruption with ease. The ground itself became the enemy, sucking mire that clutched at every step, dragging at my armored boots and draining speed from my advance. It was there, in that stinking morass, that the first true ordeal of my transformation struck. From the black water heaved a colossal, formless predator, a heaving gel of tentacles dripping corrosive slime. I fired without hesitation, bolt pistol roaring, mass reactive shells bursting inside its translucent flesh. The wounds closed almost as soon as they tore open, the creature absorbing punishment as if my shots were nothing. For the first time since GeneCraft remade me, I felt fear, not the steady undercurrent of failure that had shadowed every trial, but a raw, primal terror. Here stood an adversary I could not easily master, a force beyond the limits of my training and weaponry. Once, such fear would have triggered a frantic retreat. But the hypno-indoctrination burned into my mind had rewritten those instincts, forging resolve where flight might have been. Fear no longer ruled me, it sharpened me. What once might have erupted as panic now became a cold surge of heightened senses and precise tactical reasoning. I weighed my options with an almost inhuman clarity. A direct assault was pointless. My bolt pistol held limited ammunition, and the creature's regenerative flesh rendered gunfire nearly useless. Yet retreat risked precious hours and could doom the mission. Careful observation revealed the beast was fiercely territorial, but sluggish once drawn from its watery lair. The answer emerged with mechanical certainty. I chose a course that curved around its domain, firing the pistol not to kill, but to divert. Each shot a calculated lure to one flank, while I slipped along another. The detour cost an hour, but it conserved ammunition and spared injuries that might have sabotaged the objective. By the close of the second night, I had advanced another 18 kilometers despite the unforgiving ground. The stinking marsh yielded to stark highlands, where the air thinned but tasted clean. Enhanced night vision turned darkness into a pale, navigable world, letting me pick a path across loose scree and knife-edged ravines. Along this phase, I crossed paths with 3 fellow aspirants. No words passed between us. Each man remained locked on his own route, his own proving. A brief nod sufficed for recognition before we pressed onward alone. Though bound by shared transformation and a single purpose, this ordeal was solitary by design. Each of us had to demonstrate worth without reliance on any other. On the third day, I finally glimpsed the extraction site. A bare plateau scoured of growth and crowned with a signal beacon that only the heightened spectrum of an Astartes auto senses could perceive. I had met the distance requirement ahead of schedule and gathered a wealth of data on the planet's resources. By any rational measure, the mission was already a success. Yet as I advanced, it became clear the final ordeal still waited. The perimeter around the beacon swarmed with life signs, predators perhaps lured by the faint electromagnetic hum of the transmitter. To claim the plateau, I would have to carve a path through the deadliest hunters this world could muster, a last crucible of martial skill. I inspected my weapons with methodical care. 2 full magazines remained for the bolt pistol, 12 rounds in total. My combat blade, nicked and scarred from earlier fights, was still dependable. The armor bore superficial wounds, yet held integrity. Fatigue pressed like lead. I had allowed myself only the barest rest to keep combat sharpness. The ensuing battle lasted 27 minutes by my armor's chronometer. I burned every remaining round, the pistol's roar giving way to the wet silence of close combat as I dispatched the final 3 adversaries with a knife alone. One savage claw ripped away my left pauldron, and a corrosive spray from another beast compromised the seal of my right gauntlet, letting the toxic air sting the exposed skin beneath. When at last I reached the beacon, my armor was lacquered in blood. Human and Xenos mingled in dark, drying layers. Brother Sergeant Crastus waited beside it, motionless, Bolter resting loosely at his side. His stance betrayed nothing, neither whether he had witnessed my final struggle, nor how long he had stood there. "You're late," he said, his voice as flat as the plateau beneath us. I glanced at my chronometer and confirmed the truth. 13 minutes beyond the appointed extraction time, lost to the unexpected resistance encircling the site. "The mission data?" I replied, extending the data slate instead of offering excuses. Crastus accepted it without comment, linking the device to his armor's systems. He stood immobile for long, silent moments, while only the faint flicker of autosense optics hinted at the rapid processing within. "Acceptable," he pronounced at last, handing the slate back. "Your tactical evaluation of the northern mineral deposits is shallow, but sufficient." Without another word, he turned toward the gunship, idling at the plateau's heart, its engines purring against the thin air. I fell in behind him, matching his pace despite exhaustion and wounds. The question escaped before discipline could stop it. How many survived? A lingering echo of human curiosity not yet burned out by indoctrination. Crastus did not slow or look back. 3, including you. The rest failed. Either they never reached their extraction points, or their data proved inadequate. 3 survivors from the 5 who had faced the trial. 3 out of the 30 taken from the hive. A 90% attrition rate. And still we were not yet full battle brothers. The cost of forging an Astartes was reckoned not merely in material resources, but in human lives. Futures extinguished so that a rare few might ascend. A return to the chapter's homeworld passed in a haze of clinical care and exhaustive debriefs. My wounds were treated with the same cold precision that had marked every stage of transformation. Damaged armor was stripped away, each plate logged for repair or reclamation. Mission data was drawn from my slate and subjected to rigorous analysis by tech marines and apothecaries. Then came the rite. The three of us who had endured the ordeal assembled in the great hall before the chapter. At least those warriors not waging war elsewhere across the sector. We knelt on the hall's frozen stone, heads bowed. Still clad in the black interface bodysuits that meshed with our armor, the chapter master himself addressed us, a presence so commanding that even veteran space marines seemed to diminish beside him. His armor was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, every segment etched with the history of centuries of battle honors. When he removed his helm, the face revealed was a chronicle of war. Scar upon scar, rebuilt again and again until little of the original flesh remained, yet radiating an austere nobility. You kneel before us as aspirants, he intoned, his voice resonant enough to fill the vast chamber without effort. You will rise as scout marines of this chapter. Your transformation is not complete and will not be for many years, the chapter master declared, his voice resonant and absolute. But you have proven yourselves worthy of the next stage in service to the Emperor. Moving with ritual gravity, he stepped to each of us in turn, touching the pommel of a ceremonial power sword to our bowed heads, a gesture echoing the ancient rites of knighthood from old Terra. No longer will you bear the names of mortal birth, he continued, the words falling like iron verdicts. You are reborn to the chapter and the Imperium. From this moment, you will be known by designation alone, and by the honor you earn through faithful service. When his shadow loomed over me and the chilled metal of the sword pressed against my scalp, he spoke the sentence that erased the last remnant of my old life. Rise, Brother Jarrell. Not Tiber Jarrell of Hive Secundus, lieutenant of the Blood Scorpions gang. Merely Jarrell, no surname, no gang, no past. A designation in the chapter's endless war engine, not an individual with private will or ambition beyond duty. Our assignment followed swiftly. The 10th Company, the scout company that serves as the crucible for neophytes until they are judged ready to stand as full battle brothers. There we came under the command of Scout Sergeant Tauron, a veteran of 3 centuries who had deliberately refused promotion to shape the next generation of Astartes. His face was a harsh topography of scars, his left eye replaced with a plain augmentic that glimmered dull red in darkness. On our first day of training, he addressed us without preamble. Forget everything you believe you know about combat, he said, voice hard as bolter steel. You are no longer gangers, militia, or whatever you once were. You are weapons of the Imperium, Sergeant Tauron declared, his voice as sharp as the edge of a power blade. And you will learn to kill with the precision and certainty your station demands. Scout training differed utterly from the savage conditioning that had come before. Where earlier we had been dismantled and hardened, now we were being shaped, reforged into purposeful instruments of war. We studied the arts of stealth and reconnaissance, how to pass unseen despite the bulk of our enhanced forms. We mastered the scout pattern bolter, a lighter cousin of the Astartes' sacred firearm, and absorbed doctrines of warfare refined over 10 millennia of ceaseless galactic conflict. Most critical of all, we learned to operate as a single entity rather than solitary fighters. The 3 of us who had endured the trials were joined by 4 neophytes from earlier intakes, forming a full squad under Tauron's command. Together we drilled, sparred and planned, each mind retaining its edge for tactical adaptability, yet always subordinate to the needs of squad and chapter. My first true combat deployment arrived 3 months into this regimen. A fringe system in the sector had sent distress signals of the Xenos predation, Orc raiders striking isolated mining outposts. Our newly forged squad was assigned to a strike force under Brother Captain Veros, descending by drop pod to engage an Orc warband entrenched within a Prometheum refinery. Nothing in my indoctrination, nothing from the brutal gang wars of the Underhive, had prepared me for the reality of combat against such a foe. Orcs were nightmares made flesh, towering as tall as a space marine, yet even broader, their hulking frames driven by a grotesque fusion of crude engineering and latent psychic force. They knew no fear, no restraint, and took joy only in violence and slaughter. Our drop pod smashed into the refinery's central courtyard with the force of an orbital strike, hatches blasting open to clear a killing lane. The full battle brothers surged out first. Tactical marines clad in blue ceramite, advancing with bolters barking in controlled, lethal rhythm, reaping the initial wave of orcs with seasoned efficiency. Sergeant Tauron led us scouts in their wake, directing us to the elevated refinery tanks where our long-barreled scout bolters could deliver precise covering fire. The stench hit me first, a reeking fog of rank fungal growth, sweat-caked flesh, and acrid industrial chemicals that managed to pierce even my enhanced respiratory filters. Then came the sound, a wall of guttural roars and frenzied bellows as the greenskins charged, their ramshackle firearms spitting lead and scrap with wild inaccuracy yet terrifying force when a shot struck true. I moved to the appointed vantage, engaging the advanced sight modes of my scout armor's targeting systems, every sense sharpened for the brutal clash already erupting below. Through the sight of my scout pattern bolter, I could pick out individual orcs in unsettling clarity, their distorted features alive with feral glee as they reveled in bloodshed. I chose targets exactly as doctrine demanded, singling out those burdened with the heaviest weapons or marked by the crude glyphs of orc leadership. My first true kill came in the shape of a knob, a towering brute nearly twice the mass of its kin, wrapped in a patchwork of scavenged armor and brandishing a massive cleaver whose energized edge could shear ceramite like parchment. I tracked its loping charge toward the tactical squad's flank, calculating the precise lead required to counter its erratic movement. 3 shots rang out in swift sequence. The first 2 bored through its thick skull, detonating within the brain case. The third, strictly unnecessary, followed the Maxim Sergeant Tauron had drilled into us. Always confirm the kill. Ammunition spent to guarantee a corpse was far preferable to leaving an enemy a chance to rise again. The engagement raged for 3 hours and 27 minutes. The orcs never broke, never begged quarter, fighting until the last body fell. We scoured the refinery chamber by chamber, corridor by corridor, with bolter fire, incendiaries, and the bite of combat blades. When the guns at last fell silent, 347 orc corpses lay counted. 2 full battle brothers had fallen, their gene seed reverently recovered by the attending apothecary for preservation and return to the chapter. Among us scouts, Brother Kraus suffered the loss of an arm to a brutal orc chopper, an injury that would demand a bionic graft upon our return to the fortress monastery. According to Sergeant Tauron's final appraisal, my own performance was sound, neither outstanding nor flawed. Sufficient proof of competence under the Emperor's gaze. I had used my ammunition within acceptable limits, held discipline beneath relentless fire, and executed every order without pause. In the Underhive, such a clash would have become legend, a tale retold for generations. Here it was nothing more than a minor skirmish, a single fleeting victory in the endless war that had burned since before my ancestors' birth, and would continue long after my own death in service. The next 2 years unfolded as an unbroken rhythm of training and deployment. We were dispatched to war zones across the sector, always in supporting roles, absorbing knowledge through observation and controlled engagements. With each mission we grew sharper, colder, ever more Astartes, ever less human. When our bodies reached the required resilience, the final augmentations were bestowed. The progenoid glands, which would one day carry forward the chapter's genetic legacy, and the black carapace, the living interface that would bind us directly to our power armor. The day that carapace fused with me and I received my first true suit of power armor marked the final death of Tiber Jor-El. If any fragment of him had survived the crucible of the years before, I stood in the chapter armory as artificers and tech marines performed the sacred rites of armoring, anointing every component with consecrated oils before locking it into place. Hours passed as each plate was joined to the black carapace with meticulous care, every seal inspected and re-inspected until the sacred machine and my altered flesh became a single, seamless instrument of war. When the final piece, the helmet, was placed in my hands, a profound sense of estrangement swept through me. I lifted it and stared into the vacant eye lenses, my reflection warped across their dark surface. The visage that stared back was almost alien. Features too flawless, too geometrically precise. Reshaped by relentless genetic sculpting and the subtle influences of the osmodular implants, my eyes no longer carried the muddy brown of birth, but burned a sharp amber, a side effect of the ocular augment that sharpened my vision beyond mortal limits. Skin once shaded in the olive hue of the hive now gleamed pale, seldom kissed by natural light. I lowered the helmet onto my head and heard the sealing hiss as it locked to the gorget. Instantly, the autosenses awoke. Cascading streams of tactical data, atmospheric metrics, and squad status icons across my perception. The world became at once hyper-detailed and strangely abstract, mediated through layers of machine interpretation and combat priority. The master of the armory, Brother Jor-El, spoke through the helmet's vox, his tone perfectly clear and commanding. You now bear the full panoply of war granted to the Adeptus Astartes. Treat it as an extension of your own body, for that is what it is. Maintain it with the devotion you give your bolter or your combat blade, for it is as much a weapon as either. Honor it as you honor the chapter's banner, for it embodies 10,000 years of unbroken war in the Emperor's name. I flexed my armored fingers, sensing the power armor answer each neural command through the black carapace, a seamless fusion of flesh and machine, the final union of the warrior I had become. The power armor magnified my already augmented strength many times over. It moved with a surprising grace that defied its massive weight. I stepped forward, then again, adjusting to the sensation of walking inside what was essentially a man-shaped tank. Your final trial awaits, the master of the armory intoned. May the Emperor guide your bolter. That last test proved both simpler and more profound than any before. We were led deep into the fortress monastery, descending through echoing halls until we reached the chamber called the Hall of Truth. There, in the presence of only the chapter's highest officers and its chaplain, we would confront the ultimate measure of our transformation and indoctrination. The chamber itself was perfectly circular, its walls lined with statues of chapter heroes reaching back to the founding age. The stone floor bore inscriptions in ancient script, verses from the Codex Astartes and the chapter's own battle liturgies. At the center waited a solitary pedestal, bearing a single relic, a bolt pistol of venerable design. Its metal surface polished smooth by the countless initiates who had gripped it before me. Over the right presided Master Vanax, flanked by Brother Chaplain Mordath and Brother Apothecary Vaughn, the triad who had overseen our making from the very beginning. Around them stood company captains and senior officers, their war plate heavy with the honors of innumerable campaigns. "Step forward, Brother Jor-El," commanded Master Vanax. I obeyed, advancing to the chamber's center, my armor's auto senses registering faint energy signatures in the floor and walls, evidence of technologies far more sophisticated than the chamber's austere antiquity suggested. "Remove your helm," ordered Chaplain Mordath. I released the seals and lifted the helmet free, the hiss of disengagement sharp in the still air. The chamber's atmosphere was cold and motionless, heavy with incense and the faint ozone bite of hidden machinery. "You stand before your chapter as one remade," Vanax proclaimed, his voice echoing beneath the vaulted dome. "Body reforged, mind indoctrinated, spirit tempered. Yet one question remains. One truth must be confronted before you may stand as a battle brother of the chapter." Brother Apothecary Vaughn stepped forward, a data slate glowing in his gauntleted grip. "According to our records," he said evenly, "you were born in Hive Secundus, Segmentum Pacificus. You rose within a gang known as the Blood Scorpions, attaining the rank of lieutenant through repeated acts of violence and calculated ruthlessness. Your faction controlled 3 underhive sectors, profiting from protection rackets and the trafficking of Obscura, a forbidden narcotic." He paused, raising his eyes from the slate. "One human, one augmetic. They studied me with cold precision. Your final deed before recruitment," he continued, "was the assassination of a rival gang leader named Vex, who sought to seize Blood Scorpion territory. You slew him and 6 of his guards with poisoned blades and improvised explosives. Is this record correct?" Vaughn asked. "It is," I answered, my own voice sounding alien, too deep and resonant to belong to the ganger they described. Chaplain Mordath stepped forward, removing his skull-faced helm to reveal a countenance so rebuilt with augmetics that only fragments of original flesh survived. "Before you lies a bolt pistol," he said evenly. "It is loaded with a single round. Behind you stands Brother Thaddeus, who completed his final trial 3 months past. Until that instant, I had not realized another soul shared the chamber. With my helmet removed, my auto senses were dormant. I did not turn, keeping strict protocol by focusing on the senior officers. Here is the final truth," Mordath continued. "The transformation you have endured is not merely of flesh, no simple matter of enhanced organs or conditioned reflexes. It is a total rewriting of self, a rebirth into a purpose your former life could never fathom. To seal this rebirth, you must cut the last tether to your past." Master Vanax's voice rumbled like distant artillery. "Take up the bolt pistol, Brother Jor-El. Turn and face Brother Thaddeus. One of you will leave this hall as a full battle brother of the chapter. The other will have rendered his final service." Cold comprehension settled over me like a blade's edge. This was the Hall of Truth's real function. Not a mere ceremonial sanctum, but the ultimate, irreversible test of obedience and indoctrination. I had been ordered to kill or be killed by another neophyte who, like me, had passed every previous trial. It was the final proof that we were weapons of the Imperium, ready to execute orders without hesitation, even unto death. I lifted the bolt pistol, feeling its ancient weight settle into my gauntleted grip, the metal cold and steady. Then I turned to confront Brother Thaddeus. He stood 5 meters distant, clad like me in full Astartes warplate, yet bareheaded. His face was unfamiliar, likely drawn from a different intake. His expression was one of absolute composure, accepting whatever fate the chapter decreed. He bore no weapon. In that instant, a torrent of thoughts flickered through my enhanced mind. I could refuse, trying to show some lingering spark of human conscience. I could fire wide, feigning error, though the chapter masters would surely detect the act. I could even turn the gun upon myself, denying them the satisfaction of stripping away my final fragment of humanity. But each possibility rang hollow. Ghosts of a self that no longer truly existed. Tiber Joral might once have balked at such a command, might have rejected it despite his own violent past, but I was no longer Tiber Joral. I was Brother Jorel now, a Space Marine neophyte, molded by hypno-indoctrination and reshaped through gene forging to obey without doubt, to regard the chapter's will as absolute. I lifted the bolt pistol, aligned the iron sights with Brother Thaddeus's forehead, and squeezed the trigger. The report thundered through the sealed chamber, the ancient mechanism cycling with flawless precision. Thaddeus stood a heartbeat longer, a neat hole blooming in his brow and a slow spill of blood and brain matter marking the end, before his armored body toppled in a crashing echo across the stone floor. Lowering the weapon, I turned back toward the chapter master and waited in silence. Vanax inclined his head in the slightest of acknowledgments. "The flesh is weak," he intoned, "but the spirit endures. You have cut the final tie to mortal humanity, Brother Jorel. You are now, in truth, Astartes." Apothecary Vaughn moved to the fallen warrior, already preparing to harvest the progenoid glands whose genetic bounty would one day give rise to future Space Marines. Nothing of value would be lost. Even in death, a son of the Emperor served. Chaplain Mordath's augmetic eyes glimmered in the dim hall as he spoke a final revelation. "There is one detail you may find of interest, Brother Jorel. Brother Thaddeus was born Vex Garnon of Hive Secundus, the rival gang leader whose assassination marked the last act of your mortal life. The Emperor's design moves in ways beyond mortal understanding, does it not?" Master Vanax observed. The revelation should have staggered me. The man I had just executed was the very enemy I once swore to kill. Vex Garnon of Hive Secundus, now reborn as Brother Thaddeus. We had both endured the same brutal ascension, only for fate, or the Emperor's will, to decree that one would end the other. Yet I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse, not even a grim appreciation of the symmetry. Such sentiments belonged to Tiber Joral, and Tiber Joral no longer existed. Only the weapon remained. "Return to the armory," Vanax commanded. "Complete the rituals of armament. You will be assigned to the 5th Company under Captain Helios. The orcs of Wa, Grimscar have invaded the Thaxos system. We deploy at dawn." I obeyed without a word. Back in the armory, my armor was blessed and consecrated anew, this time as the warplate of a fully proven Astartes. I received my bolter, a combat blade, and the full accoutrements of a tactical marine. I was placed within Squad Torrentis of the 5th Company, one component among many in the chapter's vast order of battle. That evening, as I performed the sacred rites of maintenance on my bolter and power armor, Brother Sergeant Torrentis approached. "The first deployment is always the hardest," he said quietly, dispensing with formalities. "Not because of the fighting, but because it is the first time you truly understand what you have become." I looked up from the weapon I continued to clean with unbroken precision, the rhythmic motion of my gauntleted hands as deliberate as the transformation that had remade me. "I understand my purpose, Brother Sergeant," I said. "No," he answered, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries. "You understand your function. Purpose comes later, if it comes at all. Function is what you do. Purpose is why you do it. He sat beside me on the maintenance bench, his own armor already sanctified and ready for the next day's deployment. When I was newly elevated to the battle companies, much as you are now, I found myself questioning not our orders or the codex, but the deeper meaning of our existence. We are bred to fight and die for an imperium that scarcely notes our passing, to defend humans who fear us as much as they honor us. Yes, we are weapons, but weapons wielded for what ultimate end? The thought skirted the edges of heresy, the kind of dangerous philosophy that chaplains are charged to root out. Yet Tarentus spoke as a warrior who had endured 2 centuries of warfare, his loyalty beyond any doubt. I discovered my answer in an unexpected place, he went on, during a compliance action on a hive world not unlike the one where you were born. We were dispatched to quell a worker uprising that had turned violent, a mission trivial to our capabilities. Yet the planetary defense forces had failed, and the governor petitioned our chapter for aid. He paused, those gene-forged eyes locking on something far beyond the barracks walls, a memory etched with post-human precision. We had been purging a HAB block when I found a family huddled in their dwelling, father, mother, and 3 children, paralyzed by terror, caught between the rebels occupying their level and us, the Emperor's angels of death sent to reclaim it. The father stepped forward, arms outstretched as if flesh alone could shield his loved ones from a bolt round or the blast of a frag grenade. No defiance marked his posture, only a raw, animal desperation for his offspring. Tarentus turned his gaze on me, and in that instant I felt, not merely reasoned, but felt in my marrow, that this frail mortal, so negligible in the vast machinery of the Imperium, possessed a courage born of love we, with all our engineered might and drilled obedience, could never fully comprehend. He was the very essence of what we defend. Not the Imperium as some cold abstraction, not the distant emperor upon his golden throne, but humanity itself. Flawed, stubborn, and magnificently irrational. Tarentus let the silence carry the lesson before speaking. Today you executed Brother Thaddeus without hesitation, as duty required. You are a weapon honed for war. Yet never forget, every weapon demands a guiding hand, and true purpose lies not in the strike itself, but in what that strike preserves. With those words, he left me to the solemn care of my war gear, his voice settling into my mind, alongside the hypno-indoctrination and battle dogmas that shaped my thoughts. At first light, our deployment to Thaxos 3 began as promised. We embarked aboard the strike cruiser Vigilant Faith, each squad advancing in flawless formation, moving as one living engine rather than scattered men. The passage through the warp would last 17 days, a span devoted to relentless drills, tactical preparation, and prayer for the war awaiting us. Alone in my meditation cell, kneeling before the modest shrine to the Emperor that every Space Marine maintains, I turned over Brother Sergeant Tarentus's words. The idea of a purpose beyond mere function still resisted my reforged mind. I had been shaped to obey commands, to exterminate the Imperium's foes, to serve until death closed my ledger. What end could lie outside those iron directives? Yet a faint echo of Tiber Jorel, the man I once was, stirred toward that mystery. Memories surfaced like relics from a buried epoch, the stifling underhive where survival devoured every waking moment. The gang whose brutal fellowship had bound us in blood and deprivation. And my mother, her face now dim behind years of hypno-indoctrination, taken by a curable illness because treatment was a privilege denied to the underclass, These fragments felt like artifacts locked behind armored glass, impossible to reclaim, yet carrying a resonance my current existence could not reproduce. A texture beyond the rigid calculus of Astartes' cognition. I finished my devotions and stood, consigning such thoughts to irrelevance. The strike cruiser, Vigilant Faith, would breach real space at Thaxos 3 in 17 days. There would be orcs to slay, territory to secure, and orders to fulfill. Whatever meaning might dwell beyond duty could remain unanswered, perhaps forever. As I readied myself for the first training cycle inside the strike cruiser's practice cages, my augmented hearing intercepted a murmur between two chapter serfs tending gear nearby. They spoke in low, furtive tones, unaware a space marine could perceive them from such distance. Another batch of the new ones, the first muttered. Faces like carved stone, everyone. Remember when we were taken from Hive Primus? We thought they were our deliverers, lifting us to the stars. They are what they must be, the second answered. The Emperor's finest, his angels of death. Without them, the Imperium would have fallen long millennia ago. I know, the first said softly. But sometimes I wonder what they surrendered to become like that. Not only their flesh, but whatever lies within, the human part. The other quickly sketched the sign of the Aquila. Dangerous thoughts. Best keep to your tasks. The angels hear more than you imagine. Their voices faded as they moved off, shifting to mundane talk of tools and maintenance. But their words clung to me like burrs, unwelcome yet persistent. What had I surrendered? Certainly everything that made Tiber Jorel a person, my past, my bonds, the fragile capacity for certain feelings and experiences. Yet was that truly loss, if such things would only have ended in an unmarked grave in the Underhive, forgotten and without meaning? Was it not a greater fate to serve as a weapon in the Emperor's arsenal? To die with purpose, even if comprehension never followed. The notion of purpose circled in my mind like a patient predator, gnawing at the ordered lattice of my indoctrination, testing for weakness, waiting to strike. I forced the thought aside and fixed on the imminent combat drills. If fate granted me decades, perhaps centuries, there would be time enough to ponder such abstractions. For now, there were orcs to kill and a sector to secure. As the strike cruiser Vigilant Faith plunged into the warp, its Geller field straining to keep the howling immaterium at bay, I assembled with my squad for tactical briefings. The clean clarity of battle would scour away these needless philosophical intrusions. I was Brother Jorel, tactical marine of the 5th Company, a weapon of the Imperium, born of human clay, yet reforged beyond human frailty. Should any faint shadow of Tiber Jorel linger within this transhuman frame, it would inevitably erode beneath the relentless centuries of war and service. That was no sorrow to lament, only the natural consequence of becoming one of the Emperor's angels of death. The boy had perished so the weapon might endure, and in the grim darkness of the far future, where war is the sole constant, weapons are the only coin that holds value.